You know, when we picture the Russian Revolution, we usually think of these huge political movements, right? Ideological clashes, grand speeches. But what if I told you that underneath all that, on the actual streets of the capital, Petrograd, a completely different and way more terrifying story was playing out? We're going to dive into that dark side of 1917 and see how the fight for freedom actually unleashed this incredible wave of crime and chaos.
I want you to just try and imagine this scene. This isn't from some horror movie. This was a regular thing in the revolutionary capital. Mobs of people would catch some petty thief, beat him senseless, and then literally parade his body through the streets before dumping him in a canal, all while spectators cheered them on.
It's a crazy contradiction, isn't it? You overthrow this oppressive regime, all in the name of liberty, and you end up plunging your city into a state of absolute terror. So that's the big question we're going to tackle in this explainer. How did the dream of revolution turn into a complete and utter waking nightmare for so many people?
Okay, so to get how this chaos started, we have to go right back to the beginning of the February Revolution. Because one of the very first things they did wasn't just to challenge the Tsar, it was to completely and totally obliterate the entire system of law and order that he represented.
You see, the Tsarist police, they were way more than just cops on the beat. They were what people called the city's universal administrator. I mean, they handled everything, from sanitation inspections and garbage collection to handing out business permits. So when the revolutionaries hunted them down and burned their stations, they didn't just get rid of an oppressive force, they basically paralyzed the city's most essential functions overnight.
So, this new provisional government takes over, and they're driven by these incredibly humane, super-liberal ideals. One historian even called it an innocent faith in the perfectibility of man. And right away, they abolished the death penalty. But, and this is a huge but, this idealism had a really dark side. In one of their first decrees, they declared a general amnesty, not just for political prisoners, but for every common criminal locked up.
The sheer scale of this problem was just staggering. Literally overnight, something like 20,000 convicts, we're talking thieves, robbers, murderers, were just freed. They were allowed to pour back into a city that now had absolutely no police force and no functioning legal system. I mean, the stage was perfectly set for a total disaster.
And the result of this massive power vacuum? It was immediate, and it was absolutely terrifying. Petrograd didn't just see a little spike in crime. It witnessed a complete societal implosion into total lawlessness.
I mean, the numbers really tell the story here. Just look at this. Reported thefts went from under 200 in April to almost 1,300 by the summer. People's homes were getting broken into constantly. Pickpockets were everywhere on the trams. It was a full-blown epidemic that just kept getting worse and worse month after month.
And it wasn't just petty theft. Oh no. The crime got way more violent. Robberies, often at gunpoint, tripled between the spring and the fall. Criminals got so bold, they were robbing museums, churches, even government buildings with almost military precision. The city just wasn't safe anymore, not during the day and definitely not at night. And this might be the most chilling statistic of all. To put this in perspective, before the war, in all of 1914, there were only 15 murders in Petrograd for the entire year. After the February Revolution, the average was over 18 murders every single month. The value of a human life had just completely collapsed.
And look, these weren't just statistics. They were real, gruesome events that terrorized the population. There was this one infamous case. The dismembered body parts of a Finnish businessman started washing up in the city's canals. His head was never even found. This wasn't just crime anymore. It was a total descent into savagery.
And the chaos went so far beyond just violent crime, the entire social fabric was just ripping apart at the seams. City parks turned into these huge open-air gambling dens. While some people were standing in bread lines, others were literally queuing for playing cards. Cocaine flooded the streets, syphilis rates just exploded, and with no one to clean up, the bodies of dead horses were just left to rot on the main boulevards.
This newspaper cartoon from the time just perfectly captures how hopeless people felt. They were completely trapped. The caption says it all: a robber behind and a militiaman ahead. They were terrified of the criminals, obviously, but they had absolutely zero faith in the new, totally ineffective city militia. In fact, a lot of people thought the militiamen were just as crooked as the crooks themselves, sometimes even working with them.
So what happens when the state completely and utterly fails to protect its own citizens?
Well, in Petrograd, all that fear and rage just boiled over into this horrifying new thing. People decided they were going to become the law themselves.
This quote really gets you inside their heads. With zero faith that the official militia or the courts would do anything, citizens decided the only real justice was the kind that was immediate, brutal, and delivered by the crowd. This was the birth of what they called samasud, or mob justice.
And these lynchings became horrifyingly routine. They followed this predictable, grim pattern. A suspect gets caught, the crowd holds this spontaneous trial on the spot, and then the sentence is carried out within minutes, usually a savage beating or being drowned in a canal while the crowd threw stones. This happened dozens and dozens of times. It became a dark ritual of daily life.
So what do you even call this state of total social breakdown? Well, sociologists actually have a term for it, anomie. It was coined by Emil Durkheim, and it describes this condition of complete normlessness. Basically, when all the old rules and values that hold a society together have totally dissolved, leaving this giant moral vacuum. And here's the thing about anomie. It creates this vicious cycle, a really dangerous feedback loop. The initial lawlessness from the crime wave creates terror in the population. That terror then fuels the even greater brutality of mob justice, as the crowd tries to violently reassert some kind of order. But that, of course, just deepens the chaos, leading to more fear and even more violence. This complete breakdown of society, this state of anomie, it had a profound political consequence. It created this desperate hunger in people, not for more freedom, but for something else entirely, order. By the fall of 1917, you have to remember, the average person in Petrograd wasn't thinking about abstract political debates. They were obsessed with just surviving the day, finding food, avoiding robbers, just navigating this filthy, dangerous city. That initial euphoria from the revolution was long gone. People were exhausted by a freedom that felt a lot like terror, and they became desperate for anyone who could provide just basic security. And into this vacuum stepped two very different approaches. On one side, you have the liberal provisional government, who'd abolished capital punishment and preached humanity. And on the other side, you had the Bolsheviks, who offered a very simple, very brutal solution. Unleash the Red Guards with orders to just shoot looters and robbers on the spot. No trial, no mercy. And this reveals such a crucial truth about the October Revolution. It wasn't just some political coup based purely on ideology. The Bolsheviks were also filling a massive security vacuum. They weren't just promising a workers' paradise in the future, they were promising to stop the crime wave, like right now. And for a lot of people, that promise of order was way more powerful than any promise of freedom. And what's truly wild is that Lenin didn't just take advantage of the chaos, he actively welcomed it. He saw the crime, the social collapse, even the brutal mob lynchings, not as a tragedy, but as a sign that the old world was dying. He literally saw this state of anomie as the perfect breeding ground for his party to step in and seize absolute power. And all of this leaves us with a timeless and, frankly, pretty troubling question. The story of Petrograd in 1917 really shows how a society totally exhausted by chaos and terrified for its safety might willingly trade its freedom for the promise of order. It forces us to ask, when a state can no longer fulfill its most basic duty, to protect its citizens, is the path to a new and maybe even harsher form of control all but inevitable?